Well, when I talk about threshold training, I talk more about zone 4. And that is what most coaches actually call the threshold training. And you might not be running under your threshold, but the training is meant to improve your threshold. That's why we call it threshold training, right? So, and whether you're on 4 millimole or 5 or 6, yeah, actually that's not very important for me.
The Triathlon Show 242. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Hugo van den Broek. Hugo is an elite running coach based in Kenya. He is from the Netherlands though. He is a former professional runner with a 2 hours 12 minute personal best for the marathon. These days, Hugo is a running coach. He works with both elite and upcoming elite runners in Kenya locally, and also with amateur runners and some elite runners remotely across the world. So we'll get into Hugo's coaching philosophy and training philosophy as it pertains to running right after thanking our sponsors. First, we have Precision Hydration. They make electrolyte products that you can match to your individual sweat sodium content. So people that lose a lot of sodium in their sweat will get an electrolyte supplement with more sodium in it, a higher concentration of sodium. And those that do not have as much sodium in their sweat, they will have a less concentrated supplement. So that's something that is very important, especially in hotter climates and in longer events or longer races or training days. And it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, so at least here in Portugal, it is very hot. I'm suffering a little bit, but it's okay. But definitely, hydration is one of those things that you need to try to take care of as best as you possibly can, and electrolytes is one part of it. So check out Precision Hydration, and if you're interested in getting their electrolyte supplements, use the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15 to get 15% off your order. And thank you to Roka, who are the world-leading manufacturers of wetsuits, tri-suits, swim skins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses. You can find them on roka.com/TTS, where you can get a 20% discount code that you can apply to any of those products. And some of my personal favorite products that I've used in recent months include the Maverick X2, the flagship wetsuit model, but also the Maverick MX, which is the maximum buoyancy wetsuit that Roka just launched earlier this spring, and also the Matador sunglasses, which I think are really cool, and I love using them in training and outside of training. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Hugo van den Broek. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Hugo. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Michael. I'm doing fine. Thanks. How are you?
So I'm good, thank you. Let's just start by you introducing yourself and telling the listeners a little bit more about your current coaching and your background in running.
Sure. So my name is Hugo van den Broek from the Netherlands. I am 43 years old currently, and I live in Kenya. I've been living in Kenya for 12 years now. Like I said, I was born in the Netherlands. I grew up there. I started running at the age of 15, and later became a professional runner, focusing on half marathon and full marathon. I finished my career 6 years ago when I was 37. My best results were 2 hours 12 in the marathon and 63 minutes in a half marathon. And at the end of my career, I was lucky to get a job as a coach, which fitted very well with my education. I have a master's degree in human movement science and special education. So, yeah, it was. I actually never thought of being a coach while I was an athlete, because I was so focused on my career, just trying to be the best I could be without thinking about the future, So when I started coaching, I realized this was something that I loved, and that also kind of fitted like a glove. So yeah, I've been doing that for the last. I started it in 2009 by coaching Kenyan athletes who tried to get a scholarship in the US. So these were young Kenyan athletes, 18, 19 years, who tried to get an athletic scholarship, and I was helping them by coaching them and taking them to races and organizing time trials and making contact with American college coaches. So that was fun. I did that for free, of course, but just to help them. And then in end of 2014, I got my first real job as a coach. And I have been coaching Kenyans for some years, from 2014 until 2018. I stopped that. And I'm the head coach of a group of Indian athletes, the National Academy, they call it. These are young athletes. We normally recruit them when they're 16, 17, 18, and they stay with us, as long as they can. But the oldest are 23 years. And apart from that, I'm the head coach of the Kenya Experience, which is a British-based company that organizes training camps for amateur runners, or actually runners for every level, who come from all over the world, and they come to E10 in Kenya, where I live, to learn everything about the Kenyan running and just to improve their own running also.
And the runners that you coach and have coached, the Kenyan runners, and in particular, are there some notable achievements there that you could highlight as well? What have been the best moments in your coaching career so far with the runners you've coached?
That's a good one. I have actually coached just a few Kenyan runners, only girls. So actually, the first person who contacted me was in 2014. There was a Kenyan girl, 24 years of age. She came to me and she asked me if I wanted to coach her. She came with her husband, and I said, yeah, sure, it's nice. And I started coaching her and following her workouts. And I had good contact with Global Sports Communication. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, company of Jos Hermans. And of course, they are also famous from the NN team. So I know those people very well. And I called them up and I said, I think this girl is really, really talented. And they asked me, okay, can you please continue coaching her? So I think by that time she had a personal best of 15:30 on a 5K or 15:25. And about a year later, she ran 30:40, 30:41 on a 10K, which that year, 2015, was the world best performance. So that was pretty cool, to see that.
That's really cool.
Yeah, someone, and it was not just that performance. Of course, I could see the whole year how she was improving, so I knew it was going to happen, or at least something like that. And then the next year, she ran a 66:50 something on a half marathon and qualified for the World Championships. So that was really nice. And there were a few other, three other Kenyan girls who are much younger and less. No, sorry, they weren't really much younger, but they were like younger in their career. So they were coming from a level of 35 minutes on a 10K. So I helped them improve to one of them ran 32:40, another one ran 31:45. So that was nice. I mean, everyone who is focused and improves is very satisfying for a coach. And of course, it's sometimes nice when you have a performance that really is at a world stage level, but it's not really necessary to get the satisfaction. To have a performance like that satisfied from your coaching, as you know also. My own wife did pretty well, actually. She also ran a world best performance on a 10K in 2009. She ran that year. It was 31:01 was the best time of the year in the world. She ran that, and that was actually a funny story because I was coming back from injury. At that time, I had a serious Achilles injury. Actually, it was not my Achilles; it was the bone under the Achilles, and it had to be removed because the bone was like growing and it pressed inside my Achilles. So every step was painful. So I got the surgery done, and it took me some time to rehabilitate. And one of the first races I did when I came back was the 10K Dutch Championships in the Netherlands. And so we flew from Kenya to the Netherlands, my wife and I. And my wife is a born Kenyan, Kalenjin, but she became Dutch also because we lived together in the Netherlands for 7 years. So we were running that race, and I remember I was just running that race, and I wasn't in a great shape. I have a personal best of 28:51, but I was running about 31 flat in that race. But I was happy with it because I was coming back from injury, and suddenly at I think about 9K, I heard very loud breathing behind me, and I looked back and I saw my wife coming. And I thought, no, this is not going to happen. I don't want my wife for the first time in my life to beat me. So I went really deep trying to beat her. And I was just 2 seconds ahead of her. And I hope it gave her a little bit motivation that she saw me in the race, that she pushed a bit harder maybe because she thought, hey, I can beat my husband. So she ran 31:01 that time, and later she ran to 24 on the marathon. She was European champion cross country, and she got a bronze medal at the European Championships 10,000. And from the Indian athletes that I coach, I mean, most are still young, so it's not like amazing performances, but they're doing well in general. So one of the first guys I recruited was called Murli Kavit, and he ran 33:20 on a 10K, but he was young, 17, 18 years, and I felt like he looked very smooth and he was a very focused guy. And so I could see mentally and physically that he was talented, and we started working together, and he improved quickly. And the next year he ran under 31, and 3 years after we started, he ran 28, 40 something on a 10K. And last year he ran 28:38, which he got a bronze medal at the Asian Championships in Doha. So that was pretty nice. Yeah. So I mean, there's still a long way to go, of course, for him, but I have hope that with another 2 years of training, he should be able to run under 28 minutes on a 10K, and then you're coming to the elite level.
All right, so let's then get into your coaching philosophy a bit. And you sent me a nice document, actually, so I have a fairly good idea about this, and I want to dig into some of the aspects that you consider important. And let's start with the mental side. You talk a lot about the motivation and enjoyment for training and for the process. Can you elaborate a bit on how do you instill that motivation and the enjoyment in the athletes?
That's a good one. I think it's a little bit different, of course, when you are dealing with young athletes, 17, 18, and that you have, recruited who are running maybe 60, 70, 80 kilometers per week. They're really at the beginning of their career. It's a little bit different from when you are coaching an elite runner. I'm coaching two guys who are running 2:12 to 2:16 on the marathon, and they have been elite runners for a long time. That's a different story because the elite runners, you don't have to worry so much about the motivation, right? But when it comes to young athletes, I'm aware of the fact that running is not an easy sport. It's when I started running myself when I was young, I never actually did it for fun, although I really learned to love it very quickly. I started running because I wanted to be good in it, and like I said, very quickly I fell in love with the sport. But when you're coaching young athletes, you have to be aware that some of them may drop out, or they may just not be motivated to really pursue a career in running if they don't love it. So you want them to enjoy the training, and part of that comes from variation. Having enough variation in the training, I think, is important for everyone, but especially for young athletes, because you want to build a broad base, but you also want them to enjoy it. So that's one of the things I think that's important for me, to bring enough variation in the training. And secondly, also just the whole approach to training. I want people to come to the training and be happy and to feel like they're, how do you say, they feel open to talk to the coach, and they don't come there like it's some kind of military training, where you have to be quiet and serious. And of course, I want them to be focused. And for instance, when we do certain drills and I see some athletes are not paying attention, I tell them that. And I say, hey, look, we are doing now 10 minutes of drills, and if you can't pay attention, you better go back home, because this only makes sense if you are fully focused. So the training is definitely serious, but at the same time, I want them to enjoy it and to enjoy the whole process. So part of it is also really teaching them the right mindset. And for me, the right mindset is, you can call it a mastery mindset or a growth mindset, where your whole focus is on trying to be the best you can be. For me, that's more important than anything else. Just trying to be the best you can be every day, and identifying with being an athlete rather than just saying, okay, I'm preparing for a certain race where I want to win a medal or where, I don't know, I want to win some money or something, some kind of external reward. So that is really important for me to mold the athletes in a way that they start to look at the training as a part of their identity and as a way to make them the best they can be.
Yeah, that's brilliant. In terms of variation in training, can you give just an example? How could you change? What would very monotonous training that might not be inspiring look like? And how can you change? If we look at, for example, like a training week that you might perfectly fine from just a physiological perspective, give week in, week out to an athlete, but then to keep it fun, you include some variation. What would some changes be that you would make to a very monotonous training plan to make it more varied and make the athletes enjoy the process more?
Well, different things, and I don't know. Maybe the things I say are still boring for some people, but for me, let's say we have a workout on Tuesday, then Monday morning we might just have a regular easy run where I tell them, okay, maybe Sunday has been a resting day, and I will tell them, okay, we do 60 minutes, where the first 40 minutes is relatively easy, and the last 20 minutes you pick up the pace a little bit to kind of a moderate effort, and then when they finish, they make some strides. Maybe in the afternoon we could do some hill sprints. So we jog to a hill and do a few drills, 5 to 10 minutes just to prepare their body. And then they do 5 to 10 short hill sprints of 10 seconds all out the day before a workout. That normally works pretty well. Some people say like, hey, why would you do hill sprints the day before a workout? Because you'll be tired. Well, the reality is that they're rarely tired from that. Especially if you take 2 minutes rest between the sprints, they tend to recover well from that and probably even do the workout better the next day. And it's fun. It's more fun than just going for another 1 hour easy run or another 40 minutes easy run. So there can be hill sprints. There's normal strength training. Of course, we do core and conditioning exercises. And just variation in the program. Obviously, we also have training sessions like 10 times 1000, 15 times 400. But we also have so many different types of sessions. You can think about anything. Basically, you just have to be open-minded. So there can be a variation of different distances and different paces. It can be a variation of a tempo followed by some speed. So especially towards the track season, I do that quite a lot where we want to focus a bit on race pace. But for some of the athletes, especially I would say the more slow twitch athlete, the endurance type athletes, you really want to keep a component of threshold in there. And we can talk a little bit about threshold later, what exactly threshold is. But in this case, I mean, like we would do like a 15-minute tempo on the track often, but can be also on the road. And they run that around 10K pace or a little bit slower. And then they would take a little break, maybe put on spikes and do a little bit speed work on the track after that. So we have long runs of different variations. We put stuff inside the long run. It's very rare that I give my athletes, especially those who are like full-time athletes, it's very rare that I would just give them a 90 minutes or 2 hours easy run at the same speed. Most of the time we put something inside, whether it's 10 minutes moderate, 2 or 3 sets, or some fartlek, 1 minute fast, 1 minute easy at the end of the long run, or I just kind of try to spice up the long run a bit, give a good stimulation, and it's also a bit more fun, I think. So there's another thing, by the way, is when you talk about fun, of course, definitely there is an aspect of performance in training. We all do it. When I talk about my Indian athletes, it's we do it to perform. They want to become good runners, but not every single session should be a race where they feel like they have to perform, and if they don't make the times, then it's a failure. No, a lot of sessions can be fartleks where they just go by feeling and they run on a trail. And because when I came to India in the beginning, I was kind of surprised to see that every single thing was being done on the track, and I thought no wonder that many of the athletes stopped, because it's mind-numbing after some time that you do 60 minutes easy on the track, and then you do your speed work on the track, you do every single thing on the track. So I told them we go off the track, and they became a bit nervous in the beginning. Like they said, how can we perform if we don't run on the track? And they saw they performed even better, So we asked the federation, or do you say the people in charge of the sports center there, to make a 3 kilometer trail, on a soft ground with some small hills inside. And they started doing threshold sessions there, and it was much more fun. And you don't know how fast you run, if it's 320 per k or 305 or whatever for the guys, for instance. But as long as the effort is there, and I could see that, then it's fine.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good overview. Now, moving on to training volume, what's your view on that and the importance of it for runners?
Well, yeah, I think in general, most athletes do pretty well with an increase of volume. And of course, this is something you have to increase gradually, step by step. But as we know from research, of course, for most people, of course, if you increase the volume of the easy runs, let's say you just do more easy runs, you increase your number of mitochondria, which is a very good physiological effect, but also you just increase performance, and it doesn't count for everyone in the same way. I definitely see with my athletes that some respond very well to mileage, in some cases shockingly well. I have some athletes who, after doing mostly mileage and very little, almost nothing actually at race pace, and then after a few months you start to do some race pace, they are suddenly faster than they were ever before. And you wonder, hey, where did that come from? How come they can now run that pace so easily, and 4 months ago when we were actually working on it, they couldn't do that, right? And it was just because they respond so well to mileage. And not everyone responds the same way to mileage. So that is something to keep an eye on, and to modulate your mileage. But I think in general, of course, you if you can, you want to increase your mileage. And of course, this is different for amateur runners who may have time only to train 4 times a week or 5 times a week. Then you reach a ceiling with your mileage. You just can't do more because you don't have the time for it. But if you can, then I think for me this is important to increase the mileage.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how far would you take it with the professional or aspiring professional athletes? What's the sweet spot for them once they have, assuming that you gradually build up, where do you want them to end up, in what sort of range?
Again, it's a little bit individual. I don't have something in my mind where I say this is the maximum. I have not seen also from any indication in science where it says like, okay, if you go more than 200 kilometers per week, physiological adaptations stop. No, of course there is a point where you just can't handle more. So you start, if you can handle 200k per week, that's amazing, and definitely that will help you if you can handle that and recover from that. Going from 200k per week to 220k per week might not make you better. Might make you worse because you get too tired, and then in the end you come to a phase of overtraining. But that does not necessarily mean that 220k per week is wrong. There were athletes, and there are still athletes who marathon runners who would run 230, 240k per week, and they're okay with that. So I don't really have a maximum in my head. I just want to have a gradual increase year by year for most athletes.
And how quickly do you think it's possible to ramp up, or how slowly? Perhaps a better way to phrase that is, how slowly should you ramp up to be safe?
That's a good. Yeah, also that is. It depends a little bit on the person. So definitely, some people respond better to mileage, can handle it easier. So the girls that I coach in India, there are 3 girls that are quite good, actually. I think very talented, and they are now running around 100 kilometers per week. And I think 2 years ago they were in around 70 kilometers. But this 100 is an average at the moment. But when they go to races, we may drop it down to 90 or 85 with an occasional week of 100 in between. But of course, you don't stay with the whole mileage the whole year. you normally go up and down a little bit. For the guys that I coach who have been training a little bit longer, they're a little bit older, they are around 160K per week now, and they are 23 years of age, let's say between 21 and 24. And it took them about 5 years to go from, let's say, an average of 100K per week to 160. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and of course now they're training for the track. All of them actually are focusing on track events. So if they would focus, so for instance, the guys who are training 160K per week now, if we go for the marathon, we can definitely ramp it up to 180 immediately. That would not be a problem because you would replace some of the speed work sessions for marathon and half marathon paced sessions, and these sessions of course tend to be longer, right? So it's not 10K of quality, but maybe 20K of quality. But yeah, so it would be relatively easy to go from 160 to 180 if we change the event, right? And then to go now from 180 to 200 or 220K, we probably need another 3-4 years for that.
Makes sense. And moving on to the next topic, how do you then distribute the intensity within your runners' training schedules? How much easy running do they do as a proportion of the total, and how much quality running are they doing?
Yeah, it's a good one. Makes me think a little bit about the polarized training and the 80-20 principle. I've been reading about that a lot actually, and always felt a bit like it's a bit ridiculous to come with a percentage like 80-20 because there's no top athlete and definitely no top coach that I know of or top athlete that I know of that when they make a training program they set off saying we have to have 80% in this area and 20% in that. And when you look at the research actually and just read a review from lots of studies, it's the how do you say, the percentage among elite athletes fluctuates a bit from 70 to 95% for the easy running, and then 5 to 30% for the faster running. But I've checked with my own athletes, and so with the athletes in India, for most of them, I would say 80 to 85% of their mileage, so not of their sessions, but of their mileage, is in zone 1 and zone 2. And then, how do you define those zones? So for me, zone 1 is just easy running, and zone 2 is a little bit moderate, but let's say coming is not yet as fast as marathon speed. Zone 1, I normally call it 80 to 90% of their threshold. And then zone 2 is slightly faster than that. So that's both is relatively easy running. They do 80 to 85% of that, and then the remaining 15 to 20% is divided among zone 3, zone 4, and zone 5. And as you can imagine, when they are close to the races, and they are running races like 5K, or 3K, or 1500, there's definitely a lot more zone 5. That can be around 10% of zone 5. And then, the zone 3 and 4, which is, let's say, threshold training, so marathon, half marathon speed, would be the remaining 5%. But when we are off season, like now, when there are no races in the near future, there's definitely a lot more in zone 3 and 4, especially in zone 4, which is what I call threshold training, and then very little in zone 5. So zone 5 is anything from 10K pace and faster.
Yeah.
Right.
In terms of the easy running, the zone 1, maybe zone 2 running, how do you have a sort of a hard sort of rule that don't go faster than a certain percentage of threshold, or how do you prescribe that session? What is too fast and is there any such thing as too slow? Like, do you sometimes have to tell runners that, you're maybe going too slow for the easy runs?
Yeah. Well, so for most of my runners, I kind of just let them run the easy runs the way they want, but I definitely want to know what pace they run. So I coach some amateur runners online, about 10 of them, and I will always ask them, okay, you're running a marathon in 5 minutes per K or 4:55 or whatever. What speed is your easy run, right? And the same thing for the Kenyans or the Indian runners that I coach. And in general, I feel like it's fine the way they run because people feel it. They generally don't run too fast on the easy runs or too slow. But in India, I was a bit surprised in the beginning that many of the runners were running so slow on their easy runs. So for example, some guys who are running 30, 31 minutes on a 10K race, they would do the easy runs at 5 minutes per K. And then I told them, look, guys, this is really too slow because I felt like that didn't make any sense for runners at that level. So I divided, I said, we have a recovery run. So if you have a hard workout on Tuesday morning and in the Tuesday evening you go for 40 minutes, I don't care what speed you run. This is just, you just have to feel better by the end of the 40 minutes than when you started, or at least the same, not more tired. So you can run whatever pace you want to run. But then the next day, Wednesday morning, I expect them to be, they're kind of recovered, not fully recovered, of course, but recovered enough to do a proper easy run. And then I told them, I made a rule for them that it should be between 80 and 90% of your anaerobic threshold. So for guys who are running like 30 minutes on a 10K, their threshold is around 3 minutes and 10 seconds per K, 19K per hour. So I calculated their easy running to be between 4 minutes and 3:30. So that's where I want them to be. And most of the time they're much closer to the 4 minutes. But when I tell them you can finish a bit moderate, then the last part is more towards 3:30, or they might finish in 3:25. So I actually, that is kind of an exception. I normally don't say those things, but I said that because I felt they were just running ridiculously slow. When it comes to too fast running, the rule is kind of simple, that it's more about the workouts. I mean, the easy running is important, but the speed of the easy running should not be so fast that your workouts suffer, right? So if you have a workout on a Tuesday and on a Friday, those are the two really important sessions. If you, the day before, you do your easy running so fast that you're tired the next day and you're going to do your speed work session and you can't really give the quality that you should be able to give because you're tired, then you've been running too fast on your easy run. So yeah, we keep an eye on that, of course, and I know what speed they run on the easy runs, and then I know what they can normally do in in a workout. So if I see that the workout is slower than usual, and I said, hey, what pace was your easy run yesterday? And they say, oh, I went up to 320 per K, then we know, okay, that was probably a bit too fast.
Yep, makes sense. And you already mentioned a little bit how you work with the quality workouts, the zone 5 work closer to the racing season for 5K, 1500 meter runners and so on. And further out, you do more threshold-based workouts. But can you elaborate a bit more about that sort of periodization of what types of workouts you like to do when, and why you structure it the way you structure it?
So my thinking is a little bit like this. I have a bit of Renato Canova, his philosophy. He's a famous Italian coach, and also Steve Magnus, American coach. So I take a bit from them, but it's also very much in line with how I used to think about training, actually, in that when we are further away from the important races, we work on our base, and that means that we tend to focus on the extremes. So that means if you, we are not talking about marathon runners now, that's a bit different. But if we talk about a 5K or 10K runner, when we are far from the race, we focus more on threshold running. That can be what I call threshold running sets, like 5 times 7 minutes with a 2-minute easy jog recovery. Can be a 30-minute tempo run, can be a 50-minute tempo run, which obviously is a little bit sub-threshold, but still very good to do sometimes. We do long runs, of course, with some moderate running in between. So we work on the lower side, right? Kind of the aerobic support. And then we work on the speed side. So the speed support in terms of doing hill sprints. And once they've done, hill sprints for 6 to 8 weeks, we do some flat sprints on the track. We may do sets of, one of my favorite sessions for off season is when they do a 8K tempo. So for a 30 minutes tempo run, and then they take a 5-minute break and they do 5 to 10 repetitions of 200 to 300 meters. So you have a bit of threshold running, and then you do a bit at your 1500 to 3 kilometer race pace. And so the idea is that you kind of stimulate on both ends. So this is for people who are maybe 5 to 10K runners. You want to work on the speed, on the strength, and the endurance. And then when you come closer to the race, we work a lot more on the specific speed. At the same time, I should say that we never really leave anything out. So even if we are 5 months before the race, we definitely do a little bit at race pace, but just not so much. It's, how do you say, it's watered down a bit. So there might be, if we do something at 10K pace, we might do still like some 600-meter repetitions at our 10-kilometer race pace, which, isn't really hard actually, because it's a relatively short repetition interval, right? So, and when we're coming closer to the race, we make those intervals longer. They go for a session like 3K, 3 times 2K at their 10K race pace.
Yeah, that's a great overview. And if we go a little bit deeper into the threshold training, and so, because I know that you mentioned in the document you sent me that in like farther out, as you said now as well, it's the support, the aerobic support is the term you used. How can you give some more examples in the 5 times 7 minutes and the tempo run? Sort of, how often do you work on threshold in sort of the base season, if you want to call it that, and what might the sessions look like? How much total work are you doing, and so on?
Yeah. So for me, I really believe in threshold training. I should explain a little bit more, maybe, because if you're familiar with the research of Seiler and some other scientists about polarized training, you might say like, "Hey, but I thought threshold training was not good." Well, there's a little bit difference in the terminology that we use, because if you and I think this is kind of it's a little bit of a problem, because in general, coaches and scientists are not always using the same language to describe things. So when you read the scientific literature, when they talk about threshold training, they talk about training that is slower than your 4 millimole level, right? And what they normally call zone 3 or marathon speed, right? So that is normally described in scientific literature as threshold training. So when you're working with 5 zones, you're typically in zone 3. Well, when I talk about threshold training, I talk more about zone 4. And that is what most coaches actually call the threshold training. And you might not be running under your threshold, but the training is meant to improve your threshold. That's why we call it threshold training, right? So, and whether you're on 4 millimole or 5 or 6, actually that's not very important for me, because I mean, in our case, we don't even have the facilities to test the lactate. So, it's not really something we use in our training, because we can't test it. But also, when I look at myself, for instance, I was tested sometimes when I was an athlete, and my coach used to tell me, and I read the same in training books everywhere, that your lactic threshold is the speed you can run for about 1 hour in a race, right? And I think with cycling is the same, the speed you would do for about an hour. So when they would test me, they would tell me, okay, based on your lactate curve, your lactate threshold is 3 minutes and 10 seconds per K. So you can probably run around 66, 67 minutes on a half marathon. And then 5 days later, after that test, I would go and run 63 minutes on a half marathon. So that would tell me that not that the test is useless. You can probably use it to compare your results from today, with next month or next year. But it does not always say what it claims to say, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I totally. I think that those are some really great points, and basically the gist of it is that when you're talking about threshold training, it is quite intense, the way that you're doing it, and probably it might elicit lactate values that are above 4 millimoles, and of course 4 millimoles is just an average. It's not everybody's threshold when tested is not 4 millimoles, so it makes a lot of sense to me, and so no arguments against that at all. How often would you do threshold training in your base training season?
Weekly. Yeah. So for us, for most athletes, well, when I talk about the athletes who can train full time, not the amateur runners, but so they would do between 10 and 12 training sessions per week, and we would have normally 2 hard sessions per week, and then one moderately hard. And in some weeks, it might be 3 hard sessions. So it depends a little bit on the week, and of course, it depends on the volume of the session. As you can imagine, a session with 4 or 5 kilometers of quality, you recover much faster from that than a session with 15K of quality. So, but generally, we have 2 hard sessions and one moderately hard session in a week. And off season, so yeah, let's say I should call it the base period or the fundamental period. We have a threshold session in most weeks, and there are sometimes a week without a threshold session, and occasionally there can be a week with 2 threshold sessions. Um, yeah, so and sometimes there's a combination. Like I said, we might sometimes say, hey, on Monday evening we go for a short tempo session, like a 5K, a little bit over threshold, but it's still meant to improve the threshold. Um, it might be on a Monday evening, and then on Tuesday they may have a speed work, and then Wednesday and Thursday will be relatively easy, and then Friday they may have a proper threshold session. So threshold sessions, we have 3 types of threshold sessions. The faster ones are more important. So this is a 5x6, 5x7, 5x8, 4x10 minutes. Yeah, generally between 30 minutes and 40 minutes of quality, where they should push really hard. But I normally tell them that if they do 5 repetitions, then the first 4 should be in control, like pretty hard. But of course, they should control the breathing. Like they shouldn't breathe too fast. They shouldn't breathe like one step in, one step out. Then they are probably going a bit too fast. But the last repetition, they can push harder. So that's one of the threshold sessions. The other one is a tempo, which can be anything between 10 minutes tempo and 25K tempo. Whereas, mostly we do between, let's say, 20 and 40 minutes tempo. That's one of the most regular things we do. But for the longer distance runners, we also do sometimes, let's say, a 15K, which is, 50 minutes of tempo. So this is more sub-threshold. You can say marathon intensity, maybe finishing half marathon intensity. This is also an important workout, but we don't do that very often. We might do that once in 3 weeks, and then the other weeks we do the harder threshold sessions. And then that's in the fundamental or the base period, and in the specific period, we would still definitely have threshold once in 2 weeks, sometimes every week. But a little bit shorter threshold, and then we wouldn't have the 50 minutes threshold sessions, unless they are marathon runners. Of course, it's a different story. But for the track athletes, we would reduce those longer threshold sessions and kind of keep it a bit shorter and more intense. Because I think if you come to the race, you want to give the aerobic support for your race event. But if your race event is a 10K, your aerobic support is, you can do a lot at threshold actually, because that is really direct aerobic support for the 10K, right? Because it's very close. But if your event is a 1500 meter, it's not the same, right? The aerobic support for 1500 is much closer to that. So we might, for aerobic support for 1500, we might, before the session, start with a 2K tempo, pretty short, and between 5 and 10K race pace. So I called it a tempo, but it's not really a threshold session. But it's definitely meant as an aerobic support for the 1500.
Yeah, great overview. Thank you for that. Moving on to the next topic that I want to talk about is how do you monitor the progress of your athletes? And you did mention in the document that you have 2 sort of different training groups. So depending a bit on the individual response, athletes may work with one sort of structure, one training group, and or the other. So obviously the monitoring and monitoring the response of the athlete to the training would basically decide on which group you put your athletes in. But can you talk a little bit more about that monitoring and the individuality and adapting training for the athlete?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is it's also coaching is always a learning process, and for me also, of course, it's you continuously learn and you adjust your training. So in the beginning with the athletes that I coached, when we were having a group of 30 athletes and maybe 10 of them would run a 5K, I would have one group for the 5K athletes. But at some point, it became difficult because as you get to know the athletes better, you start to realize how different they are. In the beginning, you don't see that, of course, because you don't know them very well. But after some time, I realized, like, hey, this guy, he can keep pushing and pushing the longer intervals, and yeah, he can handle that. But the other one, he can't handle that, but he has great lactic power. Like, he's much anaerobically much stronger, but he can't do maybe the long runs. He can't do very good. But they're both 5K runners, and they're running almost the same time. The one has probably one of them had a much stronger aerobic system, and the anaerobic system is a bit underdeveloped, or it's not so talented there. Whereas the other one, he could run 400 meters in 52 seconds, but his endurance was weaker and he just couldn't handle it also the same. And the same thing for the girls, you see differences. It's the same as with the boys. So then I started dividing the groups. And so I made, more like you can call it fast twitch group and a slow twitch group. In my case, I didn't like to, use the names like a 5K group or 1500 group, because I felt like some athletes, they're running 5K, but they might also do 1500, or they're running 5K to 10K. So I gave different names. So the athletes in India, they are in the tigers group, or the horses group, or the gazelles group. So that was just a kind of a fun way for me to make the different groups and not to kind of confuse it also for them. So what did I want to say? Yeah, so I started putting them in different groups depending not only on the race event, but also on how they respond to training. So like I said, some people have, they can run, it doesn't matter what you give them, they can always run a last 400 in 55 seconds. Whereas others, they are much stronger in the longer endurance work, right? So I gave slightly different training based on that. So that's one thing. And then, sorry?
Sorry, I was going to follow up on that and ask, so do you tailor then for the more fast twitch group, do you give training that is actually sort of promoting their strengths a bit more and working more to their strengths? Is that the way you work? And then obviously vice versa with the slow twitch group? Or do you focus more on minimizing the weaknesses, so maybe bringing up the slow twitch side, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question and a little bit difficult to answer because I have ideas about that, but I can't say I've completely figured it out. But one of the things I know for sure is like for both of them, we want to improve their weaknesses. And of course, we also want to improve their strengths. But it's like working on their weaknesses works a little bit different for all of them. For example, for the slow twitch group, I found that if we don't do regular injections of speed, where it can be just hill sprints of 10 seconds or a little bit longer hill work, or it can be 10 times 200 meters or 5 times 300 at the end of a session. If we don't do that, then they become really slow. Then they still improve, maybe based on the endurance work, but it will be very hard for them to transition from the base period to the specific period, because they can be very comfortable up to 3 minutes per K, but then when they go to 257, 258, suddenly they can't handle the lactate or the tiredness that comes with it. You know what I mean? Their anaerobic system just isn't strong enough. So we kind of really regularly have to stimulate their lactic system a little bit, but not too much. For the fast twitch group, their endurance is their weaker part, but they can't handle so much. For instance, fast or long runs. So with them, we have to be a bit more careful. Generally, with the one thing we know, for instance, is that, or what we assume is that when you're fast twitch athletes, your anaerobic system is a little bit stronger. So with anything that you do, you tend to use your fast twitch fibers a bit more, and you tend to be a little bit more anaerobic compared to the slow twitch athlete. So the slow twitch athlete, for instance, if you give a threshold session, he or she is not likely to really go over the threshold because they feel that immediately leads to tiredness with them, and then they reduce the pace a bit, and then they're fine. But with the fast twitch athletes, if you are not careful, they can completely destroy their threshold sessions because they might run much faster than threshold without realizing it, because their anaerobic system is strong, and they run with much higher lactate, and they don't even notice it until suddenly they are you know uh, they're dead, like they're finished, and then they have to slow down a lot. So with the fast twitch athletes, we are a little bit careful with the length and the, let's say, the intensity of the long runs and the general easy runs. So the slow twitch athlete, for instance, when they go for a 60-minute easy run, they can easily finish in 3:30 per k, which for them is a little bit moderate, and that's fine. And then the next day they can do a workout. If that's for the slow twitch athletes. If the fast twitch athletes would do the same, running that speed will probably they will recruit more of their fast twitch muscles and produce more lactate, and they might not be recovered the next day. So they have to be much more careful with the endurance part. And they are, most of the time, the fast twitch athletes are not that good in longer intervals. So we have to be more careful in building that up. So for the fast twitch athletes to work on their threshold, sometimes it's better to do shorter intervals than the longer intervals. But it depends a bit, yeah, there's something to say for both things. If you do the shorter intervals with the fast twitch athletes, it is possible, but it can be smart. I mean, but you have to keep the recovery very short. So instead of doing maybe 5 times 8 minutes with 2 minutes rest, you might do 7 times 5 minutes with 1 minute rest. So you make sure they are not blowing up in training, but also if you make the rest too long, they tend to run too fast and run much faster than their threshold. Sometimes if you really want to give a good stimulus for the aerobic system, you have to be sure that you actually engage the aerobic system and not the anaerobic system.
Yeah, those are some really excellent points, and I totally agree with you there. And yeah, it's really important to recognize the different characteristics in terms of fast twitch versus slow twitch of athletes and adjust accordingly. In terms of the general monitoring, if we get back to that topic, what are the things that you look at when it comes to just monitoring the progress of the athlete? Do you carefully record workout splits? Do you look at the mileage week by week and so on? What's the main things that you like to follow and track?
Yeah. So again, it differs a little bit per athlete, and as you know, of course, there's so much more individuality in running and in coaching than you can read in the books. And as I just mentioned, the fast twitch and slow twitch, as you also know, of course, there's we all like to see things in black and white, but in reality, it's much more different shades of gray, right? So even when I put people in two different groups, fast twitch group and a slow twitch group, I feel like it's an improvement compared to what it was, but it's not perfect, because even within the fast twitch group there are differences, and within the slow twitch group, and it's not that if you label someone like you are fast twitch now, you have to be very careful that you don't how do you say, that you don't only look at the label. You know what I mean? That you say, okay, this is a fast twitch girl, this is a slow twitch boy, so this is how they should train. No, you know them better than just that label, right? So yeah. So now, sorry, to go back to your question about the monitoring. I actually wish we had more ways to monitor, like heart rate monitors, and maybe measuring lactate would be interesting. And I kind of wished we had good support from an exercise physiologist, so that our athletes could sometimes measure their running economy, or stuff like that. But we don't really have that. So we test their endurance level or their threshold level by once in a while doing an 8K or 30 minutes tempo run, which it's not supposed to be all out, but it's also not very far from all out. Like when they finish the 8K, they should feel like they could do 2K more, but that would be all out. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they do that, and then that gives a good indication of how much they improve their endurance level. And in terms of speed, we look at the maximum speed, what they can do on a 30 meters with flying start. So again, it's not perfect because we have to measure by hand. unfortunately, but it's the best we have. So we let them, they have like 50 meters to accelerate, and then between two cones, which are 30 meters apart, they go at maximum speed, and we measure their maximum speed. And then, of course, you always have your important training sessions. So for all my athletes, I have a document where I keep track of all the mileage, how much they do in each zone, zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But I also write all the important sessions. So if I give them a session now, which is kind of a standard session, let's say 10 times 1,000 meters with a 200-meter jog in between, I can compare with 4 months ago or 8 months ago when they did the same session, and the same for different sessions. So we have a lot of different sessions, but we have certain key sessions because, especially in India, there are very few races. So if you don't have races, you have to look for other ways. And one thing is you can do a time trial, but another thing is you can have certain key sessions where, that you use to monitor the progress.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one more thing, not completely related to this, but actually going back to the question on the quality sessions that I meant to ask but forgot, is how do you prescribe that? Do you have specific target paces, or do you prescribe more like you should do these intervals at 5K race effort or 10K race effort? So how do you do that?
Yeah, so normally I estimate what I think they can do. Based, of course, on their 5 to 10K or 3K race pace or half marathon race pace. So I know from all my athletes, whether it's the Kenyans or the Indians or the amateur runners that I coach, of course, I know more or less I know what they can run in a race, or even if they haven't done an actual 5K race, only a 10K race, I can give a pretty good estimate. Then I use that to kind of give an estimate of what I think they should run. So I might tell someone, okay, today we have a very specific session, 5 times 1,000 meters at your 5K race pace with 2 minutes or 3 minutes rest, for example. And I actually give them the speed. So I say I want it to be between maybe for a girl that can be between 3:20 and 3:15. But so I normally give a range of around 5 seconds because I know that they are normally within that. And it almost never happens that someone is slower than that and says, really, coach, I couldn't do it. Right? So they're normally within that range, but it does happen that athletes go faster because I tend to be a little bit on the careful side. And I always tell them, like, look, whatever pace I give you is an estimate so that you kind of know what to aim for. But if you feel you can go faster, you're always free to go faster. I am not a coach who says like, okay, this is your 5K pace and that is 72 seconds per lap. I don't want you to go at 70 seconds per lap. No, if they can go 70 seconds, it's fine. If they can do 68, it's also fine. Of course, what I don't want to see is that they start too fast and then slow down during the session. That can happen one time, but then I will tell them, look, this is not the way to build up your session. I want you to run a kind of constant pace and maybe finish a little bit faster than you started, but not the other way around, right? So, and of course, the longer you work with athletes, the more you can estimate what they can handle.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, moving to a different topic, this one is more moving away from the elite professional side of things and moving to the amateur recreational runners. Can you give some tips for amateur runners that just simply want to become faster runners? If we start perhaps with just beginners, people that are very much in the beginning stages of their running, what are some tips that you would give these runners?
Good one. It's a little bit a difficult question because it depends on the person. Yeah, I'm sorry if most of my questions, most of my answers start like that. It depends on the person, but I think one of the things that is good is to have a coach, and I'm not just saying that because I am doing coaching, but I really think I see the value of a coach, of an external person who looks at your training and can give you guidance. And then when it comes to the training. The amateur runners that I speak with, and in most cases, these are people who have been running already for at least a year, I would say, or 2 or 3 years, so not complete beginners. So Some of the amateur runners train too polarized in a way that they do only easy running, and then when they go for a workout, they run so much faster than their race pace, which generally tends to be 10K. So most of the amateur runners will focus on road races, 10K, half marathon, and then they go to the track and do 400-meter repetitions much faster than race pace, which is not a bad thing to do, but you definitely want to focus most of your attention on developing your aerobic system, right? So especially when you're a 10K and half marathon amateur runner, you want to really develop your aerobic system. So you want to train in those, especially zone 4. So those repetitions that I just mentioned for the Indians, for instance, where you do 5 times 6 minutes, or you may start with 5 times 5 minutes. Those are important sessions for amateur runners to develop a good, strong aerobic system. At the same time, I see there are some amateur runners who do everything in those zones. So basically, they go out for a run 3 times a week or 4 times a week, and every time they run 45 minutes to 60 minutes at a speed that is more or less their half marathon or marathon race pace, which is also not good, of course. So that's the opposite of polarized training. So you don't want to be too polarized, but you definitely don't want to be completely unpolarized in a way that all your running is kind of in those intermediate zones. You want to modulate your training, so differentiate between maybe 2 workouts per week where you do quality, and then the rest can be easy running. But in the quality sessions, you definitely want to focus on building a good aerobic base. I think that's important, and doing something at your race pace.
Yeah, a great advice. And what if for some runners and you might be working with these types of runners as well, the pretty fast amateur runners, let's say you have somebody who's running a marathon in between 2:30 to 3 hours or something, all of those would be considered pretty fast by amateur standards.
Yes.
Then what and they have reached a plateau. So obviously this is somebody who has a lot of running experience usually and have trained a lot and done quite reasonably good training usually, but what are the things that you tend to see work for breaking out of a plateau once you have reached a certain level and can't seem to get any faster?
Good question. I think the thing I see most is that people are still able to increase the amount of quality running they do in a certain session. So instead of running 6 to 8K of quality during a workout, you can increase that to 10 to 12K of quality or even more. For example, when you are talking about the marathon running, if you look at the elites, for instance, they do stuff like 4 times 7K at their marathon speed, 5 times 5K at their marathon speed with only 2 minutes recovery, maybe. So these are very tough sessions, but for good amateurs, they can build up to that. So I've seen some amateurs, who run marathons and they do good long runs, but they hardly run at marathon speed. Maybe the last part of their long run might be a little bit in marathon speed. And then when they do quality sessions, they may do something at their 10K speed or their threshold. But yeah, so one of the things they could do to increase their marathon performance is to do longer repetitions at marathon speed. And in general, also for those who are running 10Ks, for instance, 10K road races, you may do a session like 10 times 1000 at your 10K race pace, but why don't you increase that to 6 times a mile at your race pace, and then you go to 5 times 2K, after some weeks, and once you can do 5 times 2K at your 10K race pace, make it a session like 3K, 2K, 2K. You do longer intervals. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think this is one of the things where I see that there's a difference between elites and amateurs. And I think this is partly just because the elites have good coaches who are very open-minded in their thinking, and they know that if they want to improve the performance at race pace, that not only so there's basically 2 things you want to improve. You want to run longer at your race pace in a training session or in a week, and you want to run longer repetitions. So you can keep the length of the session the same, but just do longer repetitions. Like I said, instead of 10 times 1000, you do 3 times 3K or 4 times 3K, but at the same speed. So you have the longer intervals. So of course, this is much harder than doing shorter intervals. And the other thing is that you can make the whole session longer. So instead of doing 10 times 1000, you can increase to 15 times 1000. And of course, this becomes hard, but this is what you see with elite runners, that it's really, they have 2 or sometimes 3 really tough quality sessions in the week, and the rest is more or less about recovery and easy running. And they instead of doing more quality sessions in a week, people tend to simply make the quality sessions that they have harder, longer, and heavier.
Yeah. And for athletes that have a pretty limited time to train, you alluded to this a bit earlier, how do you think that they can get the most bang for their buck in training? Let's say you are only able to run 4 or 5 times per week, and I don't know however long you're going to run for those 4 or 5 times, but it doesn't really matter. But the point being that you have a certain constraint in terms of time. Should you think differently about training if you are on a more tight time budget?
Yeah, I have thought about it, and it's also a good question, and it's something that I think no one knows the real answer, and science has not given us an answer to that. But I can give you my view, and I think in this way the 80-20 training is definitely overrated for amateurs. Like I said earlier in our conversation, that my athletes, those who are running high mileage, they tend to be on a 80-20 or 85-15 how do you say division between easy and quality, whereas the quality is done zone 3, zone 4, and zone 5 together. But for the amateur runners, it's a different story, because maybe when you start, it might be like that. But if you have been training for, let's say, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and you can do 5 sessions per week, I think the principal point of training is that you have to challenge yourself. You have to kind of damage your body in order to create a adaptation, to improve, right? So if you can't improve, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I was thinking maybe we dropped again. But so if you can't improve in terms of mileage, if you can't increase the mileage, if you can't increase the number of easy runs because of your limited time, there's only 2 things you can improve, and that is you can increase the speed of your easy runs, or you can increase the workouts, like make the workouts harder, right? So these are 2 ways when you are an amateur runner and you're training like 5 times a week. In most cases, people can still handle 2 workouts per week. So you have to throw the 80-20 out of the window then. Because the percentages are different, but you can do the 2 quality sessions per week. And if you want to improve, you can either make those quality sessions harder, or you can say, if you recovered well, you can increase a little bit the speed of maybe 1 or 2 of your easy runs. and in that case, I would rather than kind of increasing the whole speed of the easy run, I would say, if you, let's say now you have done a workout on a Saturday, and maybe on Sunday you had time, you did an easy run really for recovery, and then you have another easy run on a Tuesday. You might say, hey, now I can, I start easy, but the last 20 or 30 minutes I increase the speed and I go up to marathon pace, right? So that gives you a different stimulation. And of course, you should only do that if it doesn't really harm the workout that you have maybe on a Wednesday or a Thursday. But if you can't increase the time of, if you can't run more, simply you can only run faster. And the biggest principle of training is that you have to keep on stimulating yourself. So if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, after some time you are not going to improve, of course. So if you can't increase the mileage, you definitely have to think about increasing some speed somewhere.
Yeah, very, very good points there. And one final question before we start to wrap up here. You mentioned already having Renato Canova and Steve Magnus as some of your mentors. And also I know Patrick Sang is somebody that you have had interactions with, the coach of Eliud Kipchoge. Can you give a couple of examples of things that you've taken from these great coaches that you think are really useful and that would be interesting for the listeners to know about?
Sure. Yeah, Patrick Sang, a great coach. I admire him, and I have spoken to him a few times. Sometimes it's just you visit an athlete's engagement, and then Patrick is there also, and then we talk a bit. And another time I asked him, can we sit down? And he invited me for lunch somewhere, and we sat down for 3 hours just talking about training. So it was great that he was willing to do that. And so one of the things he told me is take care of the dynamics. And I was trying to figure out what does he mean with dynamics. So what he means is um, you have to care more about the mental side of training and coaching than purely, being busy with the training program. And I think he's totally right about that. I have seen the same thing with many athletes. If from the mental point of view, if the athlete is not in the right state of mind, doesn't have the right focus, doesn't have the confidence, doesn't have the motivation to wake up every day and say, I want to be the best I can be, no program that you make will have big benefit. It doesn't really matter what you give if someone doesn't have the right mental approach. So that mental approach is really, really important. And that's what Patrick told me, and it kind of resonated very well with me. And I have always kept that in mind. Like I see the same thing in with many of my athletes, and of course the way athletes improve is partially due to physical or physiological reasons, but I also see a very big how do you say a correlation with how they are mentally, how focused they are, how hungry for the training they are, how much they are busy with short-term thinking and just like, okay, I want to finish the training and then I go back to my room and then I'm on Facebook and then I'm busy chatting with my friends. And when you talk with them, they might say, no, but I'm resting, I'm laying on my bed, I'm doing nothing. Yes, but it's not the same. It's not the same with an athlete who says, okay, I've done my training, now I'm going to eat and then I'm going to drink something and I'm going to sleep for 1.5 hours, and then I wake up, I make sure I have my lunch before 1 o'clock because I want my food to go down. Then I have a session at 5 o'clock again. Maybe I can prepare mentally for that session. By the last half an hour, I just sit down and visualize for my training session. Those two athletes will have a completely different response to training uh, because of their mental approach, because of their focus and their dedication. So that is extremely important.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah, so that's for.
And do you have some nuggets from Renato Canova that you can share as well?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so Renato, also a very nice coach. He is often here in E10. Now, unfortunately, with Corona, it's not possible because you can't travel. But yeah, he's often here, and I meet him often. And the nice thing with Renato, you ask one question and you get an answer of 40 minutes. So, um, well, I think two things I can say about him. One thing is he is the most open-minded with training programs that I've ever seen. As most coaches think in terms of cycles, like you have a certain training cycle. You may say, okay, I have a fartlek, and then 3 days later we do a hill work. 2 or 3 days later we have a threshold session, and then 2 or 3 days later a long run. That is one cycle, yes, and you repeat that cycle, right? Renato Canova most of the time doesn't think that way. He just puts training sessions in the program wherever he thinks they should be and whatever session they should be. So, of course, the limitation when you have a cycle is that you kind of give the same um, value to every type of training session. Because you can, let's say now you have 4 workouts in a cycle, and one of them is a hill work. That means the hill work is equally important to the fartlek or to the threshold session or the long run. What Renato Canova does, he just if he wants more hill work, he can put he'll work every week. But other sessions he might change completely. He might say this week we have a quality session on a Monday, on a Wednesday, and then on a Sunday. And then next week we have a quality session on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And yeah, so in that way he has taught me to think completely open-minded, not even to think in terms of weeks of Monday to Sunday, but you just have a program for the next 30 days and you fill in the workouts on the places where you want them to be. And of course, this is not possible so much with amateur runners because they have a family, they have a job, they may have other commitments, so this is different. But for athletes who are elite level, or maybe some others who have the flexibility to train that way, I think it is a big advantage. In that way, when you have no limitations at all, but just put your sessions where you want to have them without thinking in terms of, how do you say, to be limited to a week or to a certain cycle. That is one thing I learned from him. The other thing was not so long ago, he told me that I found it also interesting, where many coaches actually focus on for the middle distance runners, let's say the 1500 to 5K, or 5K is becoming a little bit long distance, but even up to 10K runners, in the last 4 to 6 weeks of training, they focus more on race specific work. Renato said that he stops with that about 2 weeks before the race, 14 to 12 days before the race. He said in the last 12 days before the race, he does more threshold session, so that he said sometimes the aerobic level, the threshold, anaerobic threshold goes down a little bit because of the speed work that the athletes do. So he wants them to catch up basically in the last 12 days, and also to avoid the tiredness of lactic sessions. So when athletes have, for example, a 5K race, he will do very hard 5K sessions until 2 weeks before the race, or maybe 12 days. And then in the last part, he will do more threshold sessions and maybe do some 200 or 300 repetitions at race pace only.
Super interesting. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I thought also, yeah.
Now, let's go into the final part, the rapid fire questions, and keep your answers to one sentence or less.
Okay,
in this situation, it's actually important because I have another meeting in 5 minutes.
Okay,
so
I'll do my best.
We starting to wrap up. But the first one is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to running or endurance sports?
That's an easy one. Scienceofrunning.com from Steve Magnus, and he also has a book, Science of Running. I have many, but this one stands out.
Yeah, great one. What's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
I don't have much gear or equipment. We use the heart rate monitor, but I'm not using anymore. I go for the Garmin or the GPS watch. Let's say I still love that, to see all the splits, and to know what speed you're running. So both for my athletes as for myself.
And finally, what's a personal habit that helped you achieve success?
Two things. This one is a little bit longer answer, but I'll try to still keep it short. One thing is meditation. When I was an athlete, I started this meditation whereby I would focus on my breathing, and at the same time I would contract and relax my muscles one by one. It would take me about half an hour, and I felt it greatly improved my focus, my ability to focus in competitions. It improved my confidence, and since I started doing that, I can honestly say I never had a single bad race in my life. Like, I would have some races that I wasn't really good just because I wasn't physically so good, maybe coming back from injury. But this meditation, and in combination with visualization for races and training sessions, I can honestly say that I never had a race where I underperformed. So that was really important for me. And then now as a coach, what is important for me is that every day I try to switch off my internet for maybe 2 hours, so that I can work on training programs, and or maybe read some scientific research, or read something without being disturbed. Because as you know, when you're coaching people, especially when you coach online, as soon as I go online, I am talking with 5 to 10 people at the same time. Everyone gives their feedback from training. I give them my feedback, and we talk. And this is very important, and it's very interesting. But you can't combine it with focused studying or making training programs. So I try to really make that clear division.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice there. Really like that. Okay. And so, Hugo, final question. Where can people follow you? Are you on social media? You have the Kenya experience camps. Anything you want to mention here? And website and social media profiles and so on. Please feel free to do so.
Thanks. Yeah. So the best thing I think now is our website, trainsmarterrunfaster.com. I actually started this recently, where I wanted to increase a little bit the online coaching that I do. trainsmarterrunfaster.com. We also have Instagram with the same name, trainsmarterrunfaster.com. I also have my own coach, Hugo van den Broek. But I think trainsmarterrunfaster.com is the best for people to follow in Instagram, and via that they can also find me. And I will give any updates there and training advice and updates about my athletes, or if I have other podcasts or stuff like that, it will be announced there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hugo, for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. It was a pleasure talking to you, and have a nice rest of your day.
I am very much honored to be on your podcast, Michael. I thank you very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. And good luck. I've listened to your last podcast, and I will continue listening also.
Cheers. That's really good. Thanks. I hope that you enjoyed that interview with Hugo, and as always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com. We will link to Hugo's websites, both the Train Smarter, Run Faster and the Kenya Experience websites, and they're also available in your podcast app in the episode description. Also, you can check out all running-related episodes that we've done here by going to the running category archives on scientifictriathlon.com, and that will also be linked to in the show notes. If you're looking for training plans or coaching services, go and check out scientifictriathlon.com. We would love to help you out, and almost every single customer are very, very happy, whether it's coaching or training plans that we're talking about. So definitely worth considering if you are trying to think about the next step for improving your triathlon performance. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and take their free online sweat test to get an individualized hydration strategy for your next race, and get 15% off your order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swim skins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and get 20% off your order with the promo code that you can find on roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.